All right, so Jude, are you ready now?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. So I'm going to turn it over then to Ryan and Sam, and they're going to ask you some prepared questions which you've seen, and then you just have the opportunity to answer them. So at any point, if you need to stop or take a moment, just let me know. Okay.
No, you can start now.
Okay.
All right. So the first question we want to ask you is, what was your life like before it was interrupted by the war and the Shoah?
Mm-hmm. Well, that gives me a chance to tell you who I am and where I came from. Okay, because how much does anybody do before he's 6 years old? He has not been to a war yet. He has not been to any camps yet. Anyhow, I come from a very Orthodox Jewish family. And my family were also manufacturers. My mother was an entrepreneur, as her father was, and she's the one who started us in business. She married a great scholar. It was very traditional those days that the top student in the yeshiva or in the seminary got to marry the daughter of the rich girl. My grandfather was an entrepreneur. He was always in and out of businesses. So anyhow, my mother had the same thing, and so first she opened a grocery store, but my grandfather would raid it all the time to take stuff to give to the poor. So their profit was always gone, so she decided to move to Debrecen, the big city, and she started the knitting business. My mother could knit anything, so she married my father, who was very smart, and she taught him everything about the knitting. And first they had one factory, and the demand for their product was so huge because of the war, okay? They needed. Hungarian soldiers were fighting alongside with Hitler in the Soviet Union, where it goes down sometimes to minus 20 degrees. It's very cold. So they made them hoodies, they made them sweaters, they made them gloves, they made them socks, anything, to help them to stay warm. And so I had a good life, but a good life for an Orthodox Jew is not having a seat in a soccer field or going to the theater. So what an Orthodox Jew does after he works 8 hours or 10 hours, whatever, he comes home, he goes across the street to the synagogue, and he prays, and he studies the Bible and studies the Talmud. The Talmud explains the Bible. It has 24 sections, and my father was the top student in the seminary in that. So I heard it actually from my wife's uncle, who shared the room with him in Hungary, and he told me that your father was he was the Uber. You know what Uber is? You know that car service, and they call it Uber, which means above. Uber means above. Und in German. Unter means under. So anyhow, in that respect, we had a good life, and our lives revolved around the business and also around the synagogue. And then I turned 6, and 6 and 2 months, we already knew, I was not interested in what was going around Europe and so forth, because Hitler was already acting. He's already invaded Poland, and Second World War started. But I always watched my mother, and I could tell by my mother not smiling, not ever smiling, their concern. Okay? And then all of a sudden, at noontime, that was the main meal, the meat and potato in Hungary, not just Hungary, in Europe. The big meal was noontime. At night after work, usually you had you could have some cheese, or you could have some cookies or something like that. But the main meal, which means the Germans knew how to get the Jews. So we heard actually voices of marching and they were using the goose steps march. The goose steps is, I don't know if you ever saw a goose walk, he hits the ground real hard. So anyhow, we could hear him from a kilometer away. Then they entered our street, and there were about 30, 40 or so Hungarian gendarmerie, headed by a Hungarian officer, by a German officer, and by an SS, Gestapo officer. And they used a megaphone, and they asked everybody to be outside within 15 minutes and bring with you only your valuables and a change of underwear. Everything else you leave. That was the last time we saw our house and we saw our belongings. And we came out with a small suitcase. And as excuse me, and as soon they checked, somebody went into the house to make sure that nobody was hiding. They started marching us. They were pushing us. And you had about 7,300 Jews who lived in Debrecen. And we were marching through the main streets. And what bothered me later on, that people were, walking the streets on both sides, to and fro. Many of them knew us, we knew them, but they completely ignored us. We were ghosts. And that was a terrible thing, because, we had two factories, we had quite a few people working for us. And my father was a very generous boss. He gave them all the things that American workers get here. So anyhow, that kind of answers the question, what happened to me before 6/2? No big events, I didn't invent anything, thank God I wasn't making bed anymore. Okay, next question.
What were you like when you were a teenager?
Well, I was a teenager actually in Israel, okay? We were in the hands of the Nazis for 14 and a half months. And they, first when they marched us to the brick yard, and that's where the train station was, we were there. My mother offered to kick for the masses, because we got another 6,000 who came from the small towns around Debrecen in the villages. So we were altogether 12,000, and she offered that she's going to cook for everybody. Of course, she has a whole bunch of women who volunteered with her, but my mother was the activist, She's the one who started our business. I'll come to it. She was a brilliant woman. She was very pretty, and she was also fearless. That's one thing I inherited from her. I'm fearless. And sometimes to a point where it's not good, that my life is in danger. But that's the way I am. So anyhow, so I finished with the camps and everything when I was 8 years old. And at the age of 8, I came to Israel with a family and many other ones. We were in Paris first for a few weeks. They put us in a very fancy hotel. The food was excellent. The only thing I remember from the hotel is because it had an elevator, which I've never seen before. It was a huge elevator, and they had benches. So I had a little friend that I made in camp. And we hid under the bench, and the guy who ran the elevator kept throwing us out. But we kept coming back. That was a big deal, for us, up and down, up and down. So they separated us from my mother. In Paris, the four of us, I had two brothers and a sister. When we arrived in Paris, the major media in Paris, all the newspapers, there was no TV those days. All the newspapers, the big newspapers, they all plastered our names, our pictures on the front page, and they kept my picture also on the bottom, because I have shown the signs of starvation more than anybody else. So they wanted to show, And it became very big because they said the first children to be saved by the Americans, because we were saved by the Americans. And so they made a big deal, and after a few weeks, they took us to some kind of, like a little hotel, a pension, where they fed us, so we could gain back some of what we lost bodily. The food was excellent and so forth. And that's where we reunited with my mother. My father died already from typhoid about 2 days after liberation. There were about 13,000 people who died after liberation. They had nothing left. They had no stomachs because the stomachs shrank to nothing. So whatever they took in came straight down. So there was dysentery. The whole camp was like a bathroom all over. And the Germans appointed what they called the Judenrat, the Jewish committee. They were in charge of cleaning, but they didn't clean. The Germans picked up the worst kind of Jews they could, criminals and so forth, and they were very bad. They were terrible, and that's why everybody was hiding in a bunk, so they shouldn't be picked up by them in order to do something. But I was young, my mother couldn't contain me inside. I was always outside, and I made a friend. We were always looking for something to put in our stomachs. So anyhow, this was over. In Israel, I was put in an orphanage because I didn't have a father. My mother couldn't handle 4 of us, was impossible. Besides, the Israeli government wanted us to learn Hebrew as fast as we can. So they said if we put us together with other boys, we learn Hebrew fast, and indeed we did. Because when I came into that orphanage, there were about 7 different languages there. Lithuania, Polish, Romanian, Czechoslovakian, So in the beginning, we just fought each other all the time, bloody, because we didn't understand each other. But after 6 months, we already spoke Hebrew, and we went to school there. It was a religious school, and the locals, who were not in the Holocaust, they used to look down on us because the way we were dressed, our dress was all secondhand from America. So they could tell, and I remember that I was already at the very beginning of teenager. I was the head of the Holocaust survivors. And why? Because they were afraid of me. Because I was so filled with rage that I declared, if you're going to fight me, kill me, because I'm going to kill you. And they knew that, because once I skinned somebody, I didn't kill him. He was my best friend. He got me mad. So anyhow, so we fought with the locals there a lot. And finally, I said to the head of their gang, why are we fighting all the time? Why don't you fight me? I'll fight you. And whoever wins, and it's going to be over. So he didn't come himself, that coward. Anyhow, he sent the biggest and the heaviest boy in class to fight me. He was about 20 pounds, maybe 25 pounds heavier than I was, a couple inches taller, and we were rolling and rolling and rolling until I was in a depression and I couldn't move him because he was so heavy. So I put my hands on. From then on, we became best of friends. They never looked down on us anymore. So then they came, that's what it took, and they started to respect us. And so then when I became a teenager, I was actually in that orphanage. There was a part of the largest seminary to become rabbis, or scholars in the world. It was called Panevėžys. Now, Panevėžys was a city in Lithuania, or Lithuania. And there were 300 students there, and the rabbi there was also the minister of finance. He He was a numbers genius. And he was also a huge scholar, and I believe that he had total recall. So he was in America collecting money for his institution when the war broke out, and his 300 students were all killed in Auschwitz. So he built the one in Bnei Barak, and he also built an orphanage right next to it. So we were connected. I would say from the age of 14 and a half, when I left the orphanage, I didn't have to go far. I just went to the next building, and I became a student in the seminary, and I was there. We didn't do much, you know. There was a little sports. We played soccer a little bit, but that's all. That was the only thing we played. At the age of 18, I joined the Israeli military, and I was done with teenage years. No girls. My sister was taken to an Orthodox religious girls' orphanage, which was a terrible thing, you know, because I think she still suffers from signs of it. At least the three of us, we were together, and we had each other. Now, I was a big problem for the head of the orphanage, Mrs. Monk. She was a big woman. She was tough, but I knew that she had a golden heart. I mean, you know, we were bedwetters. I was a bedwetter till I was 11 years old. She used to walk the hallways at night, wake us up, trying to find out when it happened, you know, when we had to go. So she didn't always succeed. When it happened to me, I would get up early, take my sheet and hide it under the bed, because I was so embarrassed about it. And but thank God at 11, finally it stopped. And she was a wonderful woman, but she wanted to put me away in a delinquent home for children, which is like a prison, which means you have a record. My mother always used to come down and tell her it's not my fault, you know, it's the camps. It's full of rage. And I had an event with her that I got to tell you, you know, in the class, the locals, when they were 13 years old, bar mitzvah, did you ever hear the term? It's a big deal. They make a big party, almost like a wedding. Many of them overdo it, you know, many Jews, unfortunately. They want to show their wealth. And that's another thing, by the way, this idea that all Jews are wealthy, that's not true. In Hungary, most Jews were poor. There were some people who were very wealthy. We were well off. We were well to do, but we were not super wealthy, you know. So anyhow, when they became 13 years old, they got from their parents a gift, a fountain pen, every one of them. And I was very jealous of that. And so in the orphanage, there was a little room where the help came in the morning, they cooked, they cleaned, and I went in and I took out 1 lira from a purse. And I went to the store and I told them, can I see that pen? I said, why? Well, I have a lira, that's what it is, right? I want to buy it. And the guy looked at me, he knew that I was an orphan, one of the orphans. So he said, let me call Mrs. Monk and see if it's okay. Of course it was not okay. By then, Mrs. Monk knew already, because that lira was her bus fare to go home, that woman. So she called me in and she interrogated me in a very nice way, but for about an hour. And I insisted that I found it on the ground someplace. And she kept asking me in different ways. And I said, I found it. So finally she said, she knew that she cannot get a confession from me. So she said to me, all right, go to your room. I want you to learn by heart the 10 commandments by tomorrow. And one of the commandments is thou shalt not steal. And that's all. And she got the lira back. A lira was like $1, okay? And in school I did very poorly. It was 6 weeks before the end. I was going to finish school. The teacher spoke about me without looking at me. He says that the smartest kid in this class, I'm going to have to keep him for another year because he's not applying. I think the fact that he didn't look to me in accusation, but he spoke to the class, he got to me. Just like Mrs. Munn got to me. So anyhow, I sat down, I settled down, and I studied, and I finished the class all A's, top of the class. And when I came back to the orphanage, because the school was in town, Mrs. Munn called me. So I went into the office, and she told me, I already heard that you excelled. You were at the top of the class. And then she gave me a little box, and I opened it, and there was a fountain pen in it. And she said, the only way you gain anything in life is by working for it. Nothing comes free. And she got to me. She was, after my mother, she was my role model. She and her husband helped her. So I didn't really have a childhood. I became a man when I was 6 years and 2 months old. Never had a childhood, because you don't have a childhood in an orphanage. Okay, next question.
All right, so the third question we want to ask you is, how did the war change you?
You know what, maybe I should read to you a letter I got from Donald Trump, the president. And maybe that will answer you. I don't know, you probably know by now that I was honored by the president and also by Congress. They sang happy birthday to me, and I was told that that was the first time they were singing in Congress. Never before.
It was very neat to watch that on TV, Judah. I remember that. It was a very cool experience.
Yeah, and then he mentioned it was my 81st birthday that day, was the 5th of February, so the whole Congress sang happy birthday to me. Now, on the bus back, after we finished everything, I sat next to Buzz Aldrin, and we were talking, and he told me that he's the one who planted the American flag on the moon. So anyhow, dear Judah, thank you for being our guest at the State of the Union address. It was truly an honor to have you in attendance. We were proud to share your incredible story of survival and healing from a Nazi concentration camp nearly 75 years ago to the horrendous anti-Semitic attack on Tree of Life Synagogue this past year. You have borne witness to the evil of hatred and narrowly escaped both times. Your life story is a testament to the power of the human spirit to stand strong in the face of injustice. And also, you use the word here in some case. All right. Thank you also for spending your 81st birthday with us. We hope you enjoyed the spontaneous serenade in the house chamber to mark the special occasion. May God bless you with many more years of health and happiness. Signed by Donald Trump and Melania Trump. And I didn't even know what the word resilience is, but that's what I was dubbed with resilience. As I told you before, I have no fear. I just want to tell you one thing about when we were liberated finally, after 14 and a half months by the Americans, the first time I saw a smile on my mother's face in 14 and a half months. The woman was so special. You know, I always watched her. The way she watched my back, I watched her to see her reaction. she spoke fluent German, very high in German. Now, how does a girl coming from a Hasidic, ultra-Orthodox, learn to speak German? Usually, the only thing those ultra-Orthodox believe that a woman should learn is how to read the prayer book, how to read the Bible, not understanding anything, but being able to read it. She was not happy with that. She was a modern thinker. She wanted to go to the gymnasium. Gymnasium is like high school, except the level in the gymnasium was like 2-3 years college. So she learned German there. Her father wouldn't let her go. He said, they're going to kick me out of the synagogue if I let you go. Finally, her mother helped her out, and she went to the gymnasium. There were only 2 Jewish girls. One was 2 years ahead of her. The anti-Semitism was terrible. They were bullied all the time, but she didn't care. She learned. So when the Nazis took over, they picked her. They wanted to know anybody speaks German here, and she said, I speak German. But she spoke such a high-end German that even the officers had a problem, but they listened to her. That's all. And she told us all kinds, she gave us all kinds of little advices. For instance, you never yell. She never ever raised her voice, not even on us. She always spoke very softly, but the power was in her words and the way she said it. I remember as kids, my brother Yaakov was being chased by my father around the dining room table. And my mother was in the kitchen. A rare thing, because she was always in Budapest, somewhere else, selling the product, of our store, of our factories. But she happened to be at home. And she heard the commotion, so she came out to the door, and she saw Yaakov. We called him Tibi. His name was Tibor in Hungarian, Tibi. She said, Tibi. He right away lowered his head, and he came to my mother. And the first thing my mother did, she knew he did something wrong, or if we did something wrong, she massaged our face. She didn't hear us. She kind of massaged our face. Now, what did you do? Very quietly. And he told her what he did. And she said, I know you could do better. And she walked away. That was the biggest punishment for us, knowing that we disappointed my mother. I'll tell you a related story. I spoke at Shady Side Academy. And I noticed when I spoke about my mother, a couple of the girls there were smiling and shushing to each other, which never happened. I think it happened to me twice. I didn't want to embarrass them. I didn't want to say anything. But towards the end, I spoke to the class. And I know at your age, 15 or so, maybe 14, 15, not 14, 15, 16, I know that many of you have issues with your mothers. You can't believe how stupid they are. It's interesting because 5 years later, when you're in college, all of a sudden you realize how smart your mothers are. Most of the time smarter than your fathers. They run the house. They raise you. They do everything. So I said to him, just remember one thing about your mother. When the chips are down, your mother is the only person in your life who would gladly give her life to save yours. Not your father, not your brothers, sisters, your children, grandparents, only your mother. And I got letters. One of the letters wrote to me that she was sitting with her mother having dinner, and her mother told her, I'd give my life for you too. Just remember about your mothers. Okay? So, next question.
What do you think your life would have been like had it not been interrupted by the Holocaust?
Well, we probably would have been in Hungary, and by then we would have had maybe a half a dozen factories or more. The business was growing. And by the way, we did not just hoodies and this. we had in the first factory, we had a retail shop where wealthy women would come because our product was expensive, and my parents, I think, would design clothes for them. Needed clothes. In Europe, needed clothes during winter times was very common. Not in this country. You don't see any needed. You see sweaters, that's all. But we made dresses. We made everything. And in fact, the daughter of like the prime minister of Eastern Hungary, was a very good customer. And there was a little thing with her. She became very friendly with my mother. But one day she came in, and by then the Germans were already in Hungary. He says that there was a big meeting in a palace, and everybody was there. The German, ambassador, and from the SS, everybody was there, and they were discussing the Jewish problem. And what was the Jewish problem? Too many Jews in Hungary. There were 850,000 Jews amongst 11 million Hungarians. Okay, so there were too many. So, but you are my best friend, and I'll have your back. So my mother said to her, your problem is that you don't have enough Jews. I say, why? Every Hungarian has a best friend, a Jew. You are 11 million. You should have 11 million Jews. And of course, that was the last of their friendship. We never saw her again. My mother was very honest, she didn't mess around. She looked at you and she told you in your face, although she warned us that when they talk to us, that we should let their words fly over our shoulder. Watch their hands. Their words won't kill you, but their hands can kill you. So, my grandfather used her as the collector because he looked like a Jew, a beard and follicles and all that. And he was at a time in the grocery business in Hungary, and he had a whole bunch of stores he took care of. There was one store that the guy there was so anti-Semitic that my grandfather was afraid that he's going to kill him because he leaned over him and yelled. There are more curses in Hungarian than any other language in the world. He used every one of them. So he sends my mother. She's 15, maybe 16 years old. She gets into the door very early in the morning. When he opens, like 7 o'clock, she puts her hands behind her back. The guy knew who she was, so he starts right away, screaming and yelling. My mother doesn't pay attention. That's when she told us, let it walk, let it fly over your shoulder. And she goes around in a very low voice. She says, I see your shelves are pretty well loaded. You don't need anything right now. But later on, people will come and shop. They'll come back next day. They'll come back on Wednesday. By Thursday, you're not going to have what to sell. You think my father is going to give you another nickel's worth of merchandise? She came home with the money. She was unflappable, and she was very, very smart. And she read books. I don't know when she had the time, but she was actually intellectually also like my father. I think I come from an intellectual family, although they were very good in business. So what was the question again?
The question was, what do you think your life would have been like had it not been interrupted by the Holocaust?
I don't know if anything would force us to go to Israel. Because, my father, on his way home from work one evening, was attacked by a gang from the Arrow Cross. You know what the Arrow Cross is? Had nothing to do with religion, but their cross, the spokes ended up with an arrowhead. And they were they were terrible. They were like skinheads. They were bad. And they killed a lot of Jews. And because of Hitler, they entered the government, and they ran the government. So things got even worse for the Jews under them until the Germans came. And so anyhow, one evening coming home from work, he was attacked by a gang. And what bothered him, that one of his workers was amongst them. So next day he went to the Dutch embassy, because U.S. had no relation with Hungary, because we were allied with the Nazis. So he bought tickets to come to America. We had family here in New York, mostly in New York, and the passports and everything else, but we never got to use it. In fact, 2 days before we were supposed to leave to Hamburg in Germany and take a boat from there, the Nazis came and they took us. So to know exactly what would happen if the Shoah didn't happen, I think eventually we would probably track our way to Israel somehow. We were supposed to go to America, but we didn't go. And nothing to do with you guys, but in Paris, the Hungarian government and the Soviet Union sent people looking for people who operated factories, because they didn't know anything. They didn't know how to do anything. So my mother said that we operated 2 knitting factories. I said, why don't you come back? I said, who's going to own the factories? And they said, well, we are a socialist country now. The people own everything. So she said to him, goodbye. And she didn't want to go to America either, although she lost everything in Paris. She had in a suitcase. She entered the store. Those days, she did not take a suitcase into a store. You left it outside. By the time she finished, she came out, the suitcase was gone. So we lost everything. But still, my mother said, and it's no reflection on your generation or even your parents' generation, no more Gentiles. We're going to Israel. We're going to go to be with Jews. She got a job in Israel right away in a knitting factory. And she came to America too for my wedding, and she stayed here, and she brought the rest of the family. She got a job in a knitting factory in New York, and the guy told her, I'm sorry, I don't have any openings. So my mother, on her way out, she noticed a big bin filled with sweaters. Well, she asked him, what is this? I said, these are defects. And she said, do you mind if I fix them? So they're going to be like brand new, and you'll pay me $5 per thing. So eventually he hired her, so she had a job right away. And so we don't know. I can't be a prophet, say what would happen if Shoah didn't happen. Okay, next question.
Okay, so the next one I'm going to ask you is, what was stolen from you and your family during the Shoah?
My childhood. My livelihood for my parents. I never had a child. I was a child till 6 years old, 6 years and 2 months old. When they marched us to the brickyard, and there were 7,300 there, 1/3 was old, 1/3 very young, 1/3 in the middle. The old couldn't walk fast. If they didn't walk fast enough, they were clubbed and died. They killed them right there. I saw them clubbing, but I didn't see them dying because we were gone already by then. My sister was 13 months younger, so she was carried by my father. And she sensed what was going on, and there was a little drizzle. And she said, even the heavens are crying for us. I remember that. Mm-hmm. I never had a childhood. That's why I'm so deeply in love with my grandchildren. I'm crazy about them. And thank God they are doing very well, both of them. The older one is 20 years old now. He goes to Schreier. I don't know if you ever heard of Schreier. And in order to get in there, my grandson in high school got 4 years. Every year got 4.3. I asked him, how the heck you get 4.3? I thought 4 is the maximum. He said, you take a college course. He's very, very smart. And And he wants to, I asked him, are you going to go for your master's? He says, no, I want to go to New York. I want to become a screenwriter. He wants to write stories for TV and for the movies. He's a very, very good writer. His brother, who goes to a technology high school in Philadelphia, I'm pretty sure he's going to be an engineer. I mean, his father, by the way, my son-in-law, graduated Cornell in mathematics and is a mathematician and theater, and he chose theater. Whatever they do is okay with me, but I think of myself. What happened to me? Nothing. I grew up, thank God. My father invited me to join the business, and he always threw it at me. And I took the business from $1 million a year in business to $4.5 to $5 million in about 3 years by turning the store into an engagement ring store. We sold more engagement rings than the rest of the jewelers downtown put together. All right, next question.
Okay, the next question is, what lesson or lessons do you want to impart to young people today?
Almost be young. Don't try to be older than you are, because life is short enough. Think about it. Our world is around for what? They say 4.5 billion years. You know, I'm 83 years old. Thank God I did okay by my family. So enjoy life as much as you can, because you never know what could happen. Just enjoy life and respect and love your mother. People are too much in a hurry to give up. Oh, it's too difficult. I'll do something. Lily said, no. Do what you have to do. That's the only thing that I can impart on you. And anybody else tells you, be a doctor, be a lawyer. No, you do what you want to do. You know, so my brother-in-law asked me once, why don't you become a lawyer? And I said, because I didn't want to be a lawyer. You know, when you like what you do, it's not a job. It's a pleasure. Any other question?
Judah, when we get to that last question, it's in reference to lighting a candle. Did you have a candle on hand?
I'll be glad to. I wanted to show you a few pictures, if I may.
Sure.
Let me see. I light this candle in memory of my mother and my father and my brother Yaakov. Yaakov was a soldier. He was killed in the Suez Crisis. And he was in a unit, kind of special forces, and I took his place. I was in the special forces. The only thing I did that he didn't do, we became paratroopers. So I'm a paratrooper. And I also was a combat radio man. So anyhow, I lost my brother. He was 20 years old. And I remember when I was a teacher in Beersheba. There was a knock on my door, and the principal came in with a military officer. I knew right away, I had a bad feeling, you know. So they told me that I lost my brother, and they took me home. And when I entered the house, my mother was already sitting on a low stool without shoes on. You can't wear leather shoes. And that's what I don't know if you ever heard when somebody dies, we sit Shiva 7 days. Okay? But the first thing she told me, at least he did not die in Bergen-Belsen. He died for the state of Israel. And that was Yaakov. But again, first I'll show you my family in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
See, they're very handsome besides being very smart.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they have not a red hair, but they have when the sun shines on it, it's beautiful, you know. And that's my daughter, Elizabeth, and my son-in-law. Okay. Now I want to show you a picture of my mother when she was maybe 17 years old. I told you she was a beautiful woman.
Very beautiful.
She was very beautiful, yeah. Now I'll show you another picture, and that's my family. The only picture I have of my father. He looks like a rabbi, but actually he was a scholar, great scholar. And he was a very, my mother turned him into a manufacturer, into a businessman. Can you see?
I can see the kids in the middle right now.
You see me right next to my father? I'm the cutest one in the picture.
Very much so, Judah. Very cute.
Okay. But here is a picture. Unfortunately, my father is not around anymore. And again, I'm in the middle.
So how old are you then, Judah?
I must be about, I don't know exactly. I think I could be about maybe 7, 8 or something like that. And Yaakov is at the very end. He's the one who got killed. And I know that you have to go. So thank you very much for your questions.
Judah, thank you so much for taking the time to do this with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Very good. Very good. Thank you very much. And you too have a wonderful day too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Judah.